It's for my peoples one time.
What up, what up, what up? Ladies and gentlemen, we're back at it again. This is the Mod Squad Across the Intersection podcast. This is AJ. I'm in here with Eve and A Sweesh.
Yo.
As always, you can ingest this wonderful podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and iTunes, Google Play and Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and SoundCloud, the SoundCleasy. As always, hit us up on the social medias. We are on Twitter at Across This, and we are on the Book of Faces, Across the Intersection. Hit us up, hit us up, hit us up. I am on Twitter at Divenomous, Divenomous.
And on social, I get down with E to the V to the on Twitter.
Yeah. And always, you can always go to our website, divemedia.co. That's dive, D-I-V-E, media.co. Check out some of the articles we write. Check out the YouTube page. Check out some of our other podcasts. And y'all know we got this Patreon thing going. So please jump on Patreon if you want to support what we do. If you like what we do and you want to throw a couple shekels our way, you can sponsor us anytime.
So what is the topic for the day, AJ?
You was waiting to do that. You was waiting to do that the whole time. You're like, I'm getting right into this.
For today, yeah.
So if you've been listening to this podcast, you know we like to get long-winded. So we're gonna try something new. We're just gonna get right into it today. We're just gonna get right into it. It's been a lot of stuff going on. Y'all recall that we took 2 or 3 weeks off at the end of 2018. So because of that, we're still kind of cycling back, looking at some things that were really on our radar in 2018 to really kind of go through some of those things.
And these are things that are still relevant now. So
yeah, these are things that are still relevant today. Exactly. And one of the things that was on my definitely on my docket to talk about was the concept, and we want to give a little disclaimer here. This is going to touch a little close in some sensitive areas. So if you got children listening or something, you might want to have them fall back. You might just want to have them fall back. But there is a real thing here, and it's called sex change regret. Now, what we mean by that is, it's people who would classify themselves as transgender, and they would go all the way through, beyond cross-dressing, all the way through to an actual sex change operation, or I think it's called sex reassignment surgery.
Gender reassignment surgery.
Well, it's gender confirmation surgery.
Okay, gender confirmation surgery. Okay, so gender reassignment, gender confirmation, but it's all those people who go through the full process to have that surgery, and then they experience some remorse, and they actually want to go back now to their birth gender. That's actually a thing. And so you have a growing number of people who are going through this, who are not talked about, by the way. You don't see this on, trending on Twitter. This ain't trending on Twitter.
Well, no, you would never see anything like this trending on Twitter or on MSNBC or CNN or in Hollywood being promoted at the Oscars or anything like that.
Of course.
It would be against what these powers that we want to promote.
That's a very good point, because I'm sorry, Eva, to go off on a quick tangent, but they were parading that brother around who was walking around in like the man dress at the Oscars. I don't know if y'all saw the photo. His name is Billy something. I forget it was Billy something.
I don't know, man. I ain't really.
I didn't know who the guy was, but I had to look him up. But his name is Billy something. But anyway, they were parading him around at the Oscars because he had like a suit top with a dress bottom. It was like, oh, he's so fierce, he's so brave or whatever. I'm like, brave? But anyway, y'all know we called the
Billy Porter, but
Billy Porter. Thank you. Couldn't think of his last name. Thank you. Billy Porter is his name. Anyway, so that's neither here nor there. So this sexual regret, it's people who have gone through the surgery to have their genitals removed or restructured. They go through all the hormone treatments, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then years later, they start to experience regret. They start to feel as if I made a mistake and I want to go back to my birth gender.
So wait a second. Now, my question to you all and to the listeners is, what's the difference between that and the various changes we go through in life in general? So remember that sex, or at least that what scholars are telling us, is that sex is the physical characteristics, male and female. Gender is the social construct, saying the way that somebody should behave if they identify with one or the other. But throughout the course of the stages of life, things change. We're entering middle age, which is when people tend to look back and forward and to say, oh man, what kind of life do I want to live now? What kind of different changes do I want to make now? In the beginning of adulthood, you're trying to decide who you are and what you want to do. Some people later on in life make different changes. So what's the difference between going through the natural course of life and changing your mind about certain things, wanting to learn new things, experience new things, and this actual process?
I mean, for one, you go through a surgical procedure. You know, there's one thing to just go through different changes when you're impressionable, you know, because you have to, I mean, all of us have been to college, you know, those 18, 19, 20, you know, through your early 20s are impressionable times in our lives. And, you know, sometimes you make stupid decisions. But it's one thing to go through some changes just on what you believe and what you know, think, and then to go all the way through with having a surgical procedure. You know, if I want to grow dreads,
women have surgical procedures all the time when the turkey neck starts coming. So this isn't just, you know, changes of mind about what type of person you want to be or what you want to learn or what you want to do new in your life. Sometimes things that are not related to gender reassignment surgery are surgical as well.
Right, and I understand where you're going, Eva. And I'm sorry to jump in here. I know AJ was saying something. I just wanted to be speak on it a little bit. Well, certain things are a little bit more damaging than others. So, for example, when you're talking about dealing with a person's anatomy, dealing with a person's physiology, that's a little bit different than turkey neck. That's a little bit different than a tattoo.
Right.
You're interrupting the natural development of one's body in order to hopefully conform it to an image in which that you have in your head that you'll never be able to reach. And the idea of toying around with someone's gender is also another terminology of that is called chemical castration. So this interrupting one's puberty, interrupting the way one's body develops, has a lot of long-term physical consequences, right? Mm-hmm. And so just even going back to this whole concept of sex being different than gender, or sexual anatomy being different than gender, I wanted to just look up the etymology of the word gender, and as early I can go back to about 1300. And the term gender means kind, sort, class, a class or kind of persons or things sharing certain traits, right? From Old English genre, kind, species, character, gender. In the 12th century, modern French genre from stem of Latin genus or genus, genitive, generis, race, stock, family, kind, rank, order. Think of the word. Also, is the verb gender to bring means to bring forth. Late 14th century, from Old French genre, engender, beget, give birth to engender, beget, produce. So the word gender is akin to the word generation or to generate, and one's gender is letting themselves know what aspect or what component they provide in order to bring forth a new generation, in order to generate. That's either male or female. It's only two. So
right
the
now.
The connection between sexual anatomy and gender is quite coupled. It's not decoupled. The argument that gender is a social construct is not actually true. There are certain behaviors that are accepted and promoted and practiced amongst the two genders historically, and that is not necessarily and just because all those things aren't necessarily good does not necessarily mean that the term needs to be done away with. But unfortunately, what's happening here is that you have people who have a desire to practice sexual non-normativity, and rather than accepting that is non-normative, they would rather do away and disrupt an entire system that has existed since the dawn of man.
Right.
You brought up something that's just making me realize that I think people should have stuck with the term sex change operation, because when we look at the etymology, the background, and the definition that you just did, and look at the fact that gender is more soft and related to type or related to behavior, whereas sex is more related to the physicality, a lot of the people that we're talking about and that you're mentioning in this article, AJ, actually physically had a change. So if somebody wants to do a gender reassignment, well, you can simply behave and continue to behave according to the gender of your choice. But these are folks who are actually deciding to do something physical. So it actually is a section.
Right. What we don't realize is, and by the way, for what we're referencing, ladies and gentlemen, is a documentary called "I Want My Sex Back." You can just Google it. It's on YouTube. It's probably on Vimeo. It's a free documentary. It's about 30 minutes, and they interview people who have gone through the full, sexual reassignment surgery. And I want to reference two of the people because the first person that they reference was just a regular person, just like a regular guy. The second person that they interviewed is an author. Her name is Renee Jacks. She was a man who then became a woman and has been living as a woman for the last 40 years. She had her sexual reassignment surgery in 1990, which is crazy to think they were doing that stuff way back then. And then the third person that they interviewed in this documentary, his name is Walt Heyer. He was a man who became a woman and then went back to being a man. And now he, goes around talking to people who struggle with the regret. He has a website called sexchangeregret.com. I think that what this particular, whether it's disorder or whatever you want to call it, this particular thing that these people are dealing with, because it's not publicized. This actually reminded me of, if for the listener, if you go back and listen to the series that we did on LGBTQ, if you recall, one of the things we did was we talked about a speech given by a young lady who grew up with two moms and how she wanted to know her dad. And she, displayed a little bit of anger because her moms hid that information from her until she became an adult.
Correct.
And, so this is similar to that because she was speaking out on behalf of children who didn't have a voice to get to know that other parent. Well, that kind of stuff does not get, publicized. And so what you also have here is a growing number of people who are regretting mutilating themselves, who are, regretting essentially castrating themselves, who are now regretting that decision. And again, this type of stuff is not publicized. No one talks about it. No one goes into the disorder.
It's not publicized. Like, why is it not publicized?
I mean, it would take the air out of their sails. I mean, if the LGBTQ lobby is strong in Democratic circles, that joint is strong, and so
but we're talking about television networks. We're not talking about politicians.
I mean, those networks are bought and paid for by the same people that buy and pay for the politicians.
Yeah, and I can tell you, I can also respond and say that political correctness and science clash all the time. And I mean, you have it right now where there are so many things that science has evidence on that is not politically correct. But I mean, just even when you get to the whole thing between men and women or males and females, and how and how there are certain things that go on with women that don't necessarily go on with men, and vice versa. That certain things get promoted because it tends to play a little bit better in the ears of the populace, or in the ears of the media, than it does the other way around if it's something else. And so that happens a lot when it comes to science. Just because something is actually true does not necessarily mean that it's going to be promoted or accepted.
Good point.
At least by the powers that be.
That's a really good point. I mean, yeah, the same people that buy and pay for politicians, I think, buy and pay for these networks, and so they want a consistent message. So whether it's a liberal message or a quote unquote conservative message, it's going to be consistent, right?
So like, ultimate aim, though, is the ultimate aim some sort of the elite 2% saying we want to control the population?
Well, so I can respond to that in regard to, just to give you a specific. We talked about this before. When it comes to sex is a control mechanism. Sex was begun to be utilized in to deploy on the American populace from around the 1940s. Really from the 1920s through the 1940s, most notably through Edward Bernays, who is the person who fathered the term propaganda, and he's referred to as the father of public relations. And he was a nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he took Sigmund Freud's study of the subconscious self and the id and combined it with marketing and corporate speak, and ultimately developed what we call public relations. But that then moved also into the psychotherapy, psychoanalysis movement that kicked off in the 1940s after World War II and the fall of Germany, when the United States absorbed many Bavarians, many Hungarians, and they brought a lot of their psychoanalysis studies. And that is where we get therapy. That's where we get even the via Harry S. Truman. That's where we get the job profession of therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists. All that stuff comes from the 1940s when soldiers were coming back from World War II, and also a lot of these a lot of the Hungarians and a lot of these Khazars, or what people tend to refer to as Jews, have come over here to the United States, and they implemented themselves into school systems and got these paper degrees and doctorates and all of that. And so anyway, in with that came the sexual revolution in the from the mid 1940s through the 1950s, and the people behind that was a guy named Alfred Kinsey, and then another guy named Wilhelm Reich, and then you also have everybody's famous Hugh Hefner.
It was the sexual revolution before the 70s, which is a sexual revolution that a lot of people know about.
I am. The sexual revolution first started in 1948 with this book that was produced by a man named Alfred Kinsey. And I believe the first book was called Sexual Behavior of the Human Male. And then 4 years later, he came out with Sexual Behavior of the Human Female. So from 1948 to 1952. But anyway, these books, if you look him up in the FBI vault, you'll find that his efforts, Alfred Kinsey's efforts, his whole thing was to be able to change the idea of what was considered sexual deviancy, because he dealt with a lot of sexual confusion himself. And so he wanted to, he actually made up, and this is admitted right now by the LGBT lobby. If you look it up, Alfred Kinsey manipulated and falsified statistics in order to justify and promote sexual non-normativity to be sexually normal. So anyway, what his whole thing, and also along with the psychotherapists that came from these certain areas in Europe, they did not necessarily like English patriarchy. They hated it. They didn't like any of that. They didn't like they didn't like Protestantism. They didn't like any of that stuff of being sodomy being illegal, being immoral. They didn't like any of that stuff. And so one of their strategies in order to fight the English patriarchy or the remnants of the British crown, excuse me, was through sex, and all the psychoanalytic information in which that they've come across, in order to basically to control people. And so what happened was in the 1950s, you had this whole entire movement that started, and we're still dealing with like the grandchildren of that whole thing. But the whole goal of the joint is basically to ultimately to decriminalize statutory rape.
So let's circle back to the actual documentary. So I want to just mention a couple of books if anybody's interested in one of the people on, like I said, the one gentleman's name's Walt Heyer. You can go to his website, sexchangeregret.com. And he also has like another website, like waltheyer.com. He goes around speaking this, and the other woman, the gentleman who became a woman who had the regret, but she's in her 60s now. Renee Jacks. She wrote a book called Don't Get on That Plane, Why a Sex Change Will Ruin Your Life. And one of the things that I want to definitely push back on, well, two things. One is the first point that A brought up, that, you know, political correctness and science do clash. If anyone's familiar with the DSM, it's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, used to classify this as a mental disorder. This was actually at one time classified, gender dysphoria was actually classified as a mental disorder. And of course that was subsequently changed as the culture shifted to become more liberal. So that's where politics and science clash. If the mental health community is saying gender dysphoria is a mental illness, well, it's not politically correct anymore to classify it as that. So you got to change. So the DSM does get updated every so often. I think it's like once or twice a decade it'll get updated. They're like on DSM-5, I believe now.
But what about my question regarding the issue of population control?
I mean, but I think that this is deeper than population control. Population control is a fruit on a tree. A tree. You have to change in order to get to population control, you have to start changing the way people think about the population. But you can't just jump right to population control.
I'm just asking what the motive is. That's why.
That's my point.
I kind of look at it as think about an apple core. And an apple core has two blunted sides and it's thin in the middle. And so on one side we have population control, on the other side we have sexual deviancy and liberalism. And I'm sorry for taking so long. I kind of went through an abridged history just to kind of lay a quick foundation that on the population control side, the promoting chemical castration enables among a permanent underclass, aka Black people, and aka indigenous people throughout the Southern Hemisphere. What that does is that teaches us that encourages us to not generate, that encourages us to cut off our lineages, that encourages us to keep our numbers down. By constantly spraying, and I know I'll sound a little graphic here, by spraying our semen into unfertile ground. And if we can do that, if you have a whole class of people that are being led by their members sexually, then what that does is that removes their life force, that takes away their ability to stand up, to fight, to control themselves, to not back down. They're constantly being driven by their flesh, which gets in the scripture. So that's the value of the sexual non-normative practices and not controlling yourself and just being free sexually to do whatever it is that you want among the lower rungs of society. In the upper rungs of society, the top part of the apple core, the value behind this is that they can go around and they can have different kinds of sexual experiences without fear of reprisal or the law, which goes into what I was saying about the whole entire goal. One of the goals is to ultimately decriminalize statutory rape, which basically will allow this whole term "love is love" and pansexuality. The argument will be made that when love is experienced, there is no harm being done to any of the participants, no matter their age.
I just think that these things are fruits. I think that, we haven't gotten to the root of the tree. These things are fruit.
No, I'm not saying we have got to the root of the tree. I'm just trying to answer Eve's question.
No, I hear you, but I think that's why I was saying, even when she asked the question, I think her question still is picking at fruit, because we could talk about population control and we could get that under control. I know I just double usage of the word there. Or we could talk about sexual deviancy, but and the different ways, the different sexual practices, I should say, that are deviant. But ultimately, for me, I believe, and this is where we get a little Bible-y. I think Avery just hit on it, is we have to understand that what we're doing is an assault on the image of God himself. Like, human beings were made in the image of God, both male and female. I'm quoting Genesis. So both when male and female are in union, that is actually the full image of God. Like male and female, because he says that both man and woman, he made them when they
created them.
Yeah, he created them. When man and woman come together, whether that's physically, spiritually, when man and woman are in union, in unison, that is the full image of God, right? So when we talk about things like transgender, right? That's not just, I want to have this surgery because I want to wear dresses and blah, blah, blah. That's fruit on the tree. Oh, that's not, I want to sleep around and sleep with men and different sexual experiences. That is fruit on the tree. The root of it is, and a couple of people in that documentary, as we come around third base, a couple people in the documentary, they hinted at it. They didn't really go too deep in it, but they talked about after they had the surgery, they realized that was not the core issue. They went out and had the hormone treatments. They had this surgery. They started dating other genders because they now are in the quote unquote gender that they think they're supposed to be, and they all three of them said that didn't solve the problem. They thought the problem would be solved, and they was like, wait a minute, the problem still is not solved. So that's the origin of the regret. So after they had these surgeries, they realized that my issue is I have a problem with myself. I do not like myself. And so that's why I'm saying to encourage people to understand the root issue with many of these things is you don't understand that you are made in the image of God, both male and female, made in the image of God. And your issue is actually with God himself, not with, having these surgeries, not with hormones. Your issues are the fact that you don't realize that you were made in his image. You were made in the image of something greater than yourself. It doesn't stop with us. And I think that's where the issues are. So we get into these kind of quasi-political debates about things, and it's like, you can do whatever you want to do. You want to cut your arm off. As a matter of fact, I believe the author, Renee Jacks, she makes this statement in the documentary. I really encourage you all to go out and listen, to go out and watch it. She says that the transgender way of thinking is, if you come into the doctor with a broken leg, if your left leg is broken, rather than saying, all right, let's work on this left leg, they say, well, let's just break the right leg so that they both match. Yep. And that is essentially how they think. You have gender dysphoria, you feel like some things are going on. Let's just address that rather than going into all of this other stuff. Because there's actually things that, we're not going to get into it here, but if you want to go and research it for the listeners, there's actually practices now of hormone blocking in children, in adolescents. So people, this is deeper than just, I want to wear a dress, or this stuff is deeper. If I'm going to the point of chemically poisoning my children to block their natural growth and development as far as hormones, whether it's masculine or feminine, that is a much deeper issue. And so we have to really be willing to talk about these things. And so our point in even bringing this up is to understand these things are not talked about, right? What's talked about is, I want to get married to a man and it should be the same, and, this, that, homophobia, blah, blah, blah. There's some deeper things out here that are not discussed, not talked about, and it's for a reason. Because if it was talked about, it would take the wind out of the sails of this LGBTQ lobby. I don't got no hate for nobody, but I think that we have to be realistic and say, hey, talk about the whole picture, present the whole point.
And when the culture actually makes certain decisions to make certain things normative within a culture, we need to think about what the consequences will be generationally. So we've decided as a culture that there's certain things that are appropriate in terms of gender, appropriate behavior for males and appropriate behavior for females. And if there's a boy who is physiologically a male, but he likes poetry or he likes, modern dance, or he likes something other than warfare and sports, then since he lives in this type of environment, he thinks that he has to change who he is because people have feminized poetry and modern dance. And all he's trying to do is align his interests with his physiology. And so as a culture, we need to re-examine what we're considering to be masculine and feminine so that we won't paint ourselves into these types of corners.
Hey, what's happening, family? This is AJ. All right, so listen, this week's episode was real heavy. So because it was so heavy, both topics were pretty weighty. We went ahead and decided to cut this into 2 episodes. So part 1 just concluded, and disc 2 will be dropping shortly. So you'll have 2 episodes this week, both of them a little bit shorter than normal, but it's because both topics were a little bit weighty and we thought it was a bit much to put it all into 1 episode. So thanks again for rocking with us. We really appreciate y'all. So check out this week's second part, which will be called disc 2. That'll be the second episode. All right, peace.
Let's get started, I won't teach you. Let me set apart who is my people. The ones who set in their heart to be believers. Press on to the mark to follow Jesus. When it gets hard,